I'm Thomai Serdarï, and I came here from Greece in '95, and I started studying for my PhD in 1997, which got me this fellowship to be an assistant here in this department. Someone was a librarian at the time, Kayla Stotsky. She had the position I have now. She was herself the librarian. And so I started here in '97, and of course I met everybody, including Jim and Carol and all the others who are still in the faculty. And 2 years later I got the position as a permanent position. And even that was not, it was a time where I really knew Jim, but not very well. We both knew each other, and we knew that we're both architects. So that was already a connecting point for the two of us. But I think that we really came closer when we started teaching the same course. In effect, a course taught in two parts. I teach the fall semester, he teaches spring semester. And we started in 2003. So I would say that this is when we really became very close, and it was teaching the same group of people and teaching students for whom we were very much, we cared for, and we were very invested in their well-being, that actually brought us together. And also it was the time that I really learned a lot from Jim, because he is a teacher in a good sense of the word. Again, going back to his spirituality, he's very much interested in other people, and he tries to bring out the best that other people have. So that is what I find most valuable from my relationship with him.
Now tell me a little bit about this teaching. I was under the assumption, when you say a joint class, that the two of you were in the classroom at one time focusing on different aspects. So how to describe the course and how this
Yeah,
works.
the course is for senior students who already are very good students and want to write an honors thesis. And so they start in the fall semester with me, and imagine a group of 12 or 15 people. Sometimes we had 17 people, which is quite a large group. And I help them shape their ideas in a very methodical way, so that by the end of the semester in December, they have something concrete that they can work on, and then Jim would receive the same group of people in January when school opens again in his course, but with the material that had come out of my course, and he would help them finish the whole process and graduate with honors. And at the beginning, actually he has stopped teaching that course a few years now, and it has never been the same for me, because I feel that the process is incomplete without Jim's part on the other end of that long, way that they have to go through. And I think it's the same for the students as well, although the students who graduate today don't know who Jim is, but in any case. So it is interesting to work with students who have really ambitious ideas, and I think that Jim has always taken the heavier part of the load, in any case, because when students get to him, they had, let's say, 30 pages of text that I had forced them to somehow produce. But that's more difficult than what I had to do, and what I had to do was to really make them think of something and present it in some sort of organized way. And then what Jim is really very good at is being an editor of ideas, and he would take things that were sometimes incomprehensible or very long or very, going to all sorts of directions, and narrow them down and bring them back to really beautiful thesis that we actually have over here on the shelf behind you. And that brought us very close. In fact, we started in 2003 doing that. And I think between 2003 and perhaps 2008, these were very, very intense, intellectually intense years working with each other, but also working with the students, with all of whom we have kept up, and we're very interested in what they're doing in their lives.
Before you began this process, did you sit down with him, draw the timeline of the class, and then like mark out for yourself in a syllabus fashion, okay, week 1 you're going to do this, week 2 you're going to do this, and actually plan what your distinct roles were going to be in each of your own distinct parts of the class? Or did you improvise and allow it to evolve? Was it planned or evolutionary?
There is some sort of a plan, because there has to be, right? It's a syllabus, and yes, it's very specific what I do in the first semester and what he does in the second semester. But I think the most interesting part of the work came out of improvisation, especially because it was my first time of teaching. So I shouldn't present myself as if I had been teaching for years, right? I was thrown into this, which is very interesting because, in fact, I shouldn't have been doing this as a first-time teacher, to be directing all these people's work. So I was throwing into this, and perhaps I was trying to impose my structure of having been recently a graduate student and doing things the way a graduate student does, and forgetting that I had in front of me a group not so much familiar with methods of architecture or art history, and people who need much more emotional support rather than, methodical, practical, intellectual advice. And this is again where Jim comes in, because he's very, of course I feel comfortable going to him, right? He's very open and he's very friendly, and I feel comfortable with him. And so when things were not working out as I thought they should, and I went to him for advice, he would always say, well, let's look at that. And then he starts with all sorts of questions rather than advice, which is what makes him so much better as a teacher, right? He doesn't give you the advice, he asks you the question, which very few people know how to do. And also proves that he doesn't like listening to his own voice. He likes you coming up with a solution to your problem. So through these interactions, what was important for me was to realize that my role was to be a catalyst and really facilitate these students in what they had undertaken, and guide them through the process, something that Jim has been doing very well for many years. And also he managed to remove my anxiety of not having enough material. I don't know if you've ever taught, but someone who lectures always feels that, oh my goodness, the lecture has to run for 2 hours. I only have material for an hour and a half. What's going to happen in that last half hour? And which is a fear that should not exist, of course, because this is not what teaching is about. But I was very young and I was very new to this. And I think finally, 10 years later, I can say with certainty that a lot of my teaching style today I owe to what Jim has taught me through our informal conversations, which usually happen at 4 p.m. on Wednesday afternoon. And I'm usually anxious to get to 5 p.m. because I really want to get out of here and go home. And this is the best part of the day, right? Because he comes in, we have no agenda, and we say, okay, so how are you today? How are you today? And then something comes up, and that takes us to all sorts of directions, and very rich conversations about teaching and emotional support, and really being good at what one does.
Was there a time when, before you, in a sense, began teaching or to learn to teach, right, that you sat in on his other classes just to get a feel for how he does things? Did you ever sit in on the classes?
No, I had never sat in his classes, but we had discussed his material because he's very organized, and he has an archive here of his teachings and notes on teaching since the beginning of his time in this department. And because the material was circulating somewhere in this library, and I found it one day and I asked him about it, we got to talking about teaching and then his method on keeping records. And actually, he's a very good record keeper in the sense that he's so organized, with pertinent notes about particular individuals in the courses that he's teaching, that he can very easily then reconstitute the entire content of a course, which is quite impressive. And these records go all the way back to, I don't know, maybe 30 years of teaching. Quite impressive.
Contrary, since you were new to this and perhaps a little nervous about it, did he ever sit in the back of the classroom when you were teaching?
Yes, he did, actually.
Tell me about that.
And I'm not quite sure whether it was that same course that we taught together, because I teach something else. Very much similar idea. Young people coming up with new business ideas in the arts, and me coaching them in developing this new business plan. And I wanted someone to be a second critic the day that we had the final plans presented. And Jim, always happy to help, came. And there again one sees, and from there I learned a lot, because he has this very nice way of always encouraging the student no matter what the presentation is. You know, even if it is something atrocious and that has happened, he finds that one very small little seed that is positive, and then he makes a very big deal out of this, so that he engages the student to listen to him. And then once that has happened, then he has his way of saying, but of course now we could also consider X, Y, Z, which are the things that had never been discussed or, you know, had been ignored by the student. And I thought, quite interesting. So that went back in my own personal book on how to teach better, and how to manage to engage students in conversation rather than telling them, you know, this is correct, this is wrong, and so on and so forth.
And now an interesting point I raised with him, but I'll tell you he shied away from, was that I was in his classes in the early 1980s, a couple of them, 2, 3. And yes, there's the classroom learning, even in terms of problem solving, of intellectual development. But now 30 years later, I am now the age he was when he taught our class. It's an interesting concept. My thought is that the greatest teaching gift I got from Jim wasn't necessarily anything from the classroom experience, but over 30 years, my role model has simply become how he actually lives his life.
Right.
And I'm wondering if you have, in these decades, have perceived there's maybe two kinds of teaching going on. One that's actually the teaching formal experience, but there's also an osmosis process of absorbing someone. And if you have, I may or may not be the only one who shares that impression that he shies away from.
I think for me it's one and the same, or that's what I perceive in him, because first of all, he's very open about his beliefs, or, you know, the fact that it's interesting because what I study and what I teach in another school has to do all about luxury marketing, luxury branding, everything luxury. As you can imagine, this is a concept completely opposite to Jim's beliefs, and yet we have very productive conversations about it. But I think his being so almost like in a monastic, right? Is that a way you would describe him? Way of life. He's not depriving himself from rich experiences, because he finds those everywhere he looks around him, and that is the type of conversation that he initiates in the classroom. So, for example, what he likes doing is giving prompts to students and having them write in class without them knowing in advance what the writing prompt is going to be, or sometimes they do know what the writing prompt is going to be. and then writing in class and then sharing their writings in class with each other. And Jim, who is even more bold than I am, he shares his own writing with the class, which is something I never do. So, yet, yes, exactly. I'm evolving. So in that sense, I see one person, and I don't know how students see him, but to me, Jim is that one, as I said, very integrated physical, spiritual, and mental presence. He's very present. I don't know how else to describe that.
Do you, did you, let's see, okay, so you teach them first, then he gets them. So you never really do you ever get to talk to those students again and hear how they describe to you the other half of the class? What happened after they left you and went to him? Do you ever get feedback?
Well, yes, that has always been for them a very stressful experience, because it is the second semester and it is, right, there is a deadline, whereas the deadline exists when we start together, but it's imminent when they go through the second semester, because in May, that's it, they have to deliver. I'm not sure, actually, I cannot speak for them, because I don't know if they see the person behind that process, because they're really very much consumed by the process itself. So I'm not sure that people see him. But I will say one thing, that Jim is very much a great supporter of students. And you wouldn't believe it, but there have been all sorts of situations where students were accused of not have risen intellectually to a certain standard, and this and that, in a very, official direction from the department. You can eliminate that if you want to. But I remember a couple of cases where it was really a matter of showing that the student had done a lot of work. They were really invested in the process. And the only person who dared speak up for them was Jim. And that, I think, again, says a lot about his character and how serious he is about taking these young people and really making sure that they reach the other end of the process, that they actually get the result, but also evolve, right? That they grow through that particular process. And he's done it a few times.
Now you then have since taught solo.
Mm-hmm.
And as you're teaching solo, do you find that you could enumerate or look back and say there are now a set of I don't want to call them not catchphrases or tricks or skills, but market things that you could look back on and say, oh, I kind of hear a little Jim in the background in my head when I'm saying that?
Yes. First of all, the tricks is that if I feel that I don't have connection with the students, the best way to overcome that is to give them a writing exercise, and let's do it all together in the classroom. That has saved me several times, actually. That's the main thing. Second, very important, is we both like good writing, and he's a very good writer, and I really like. He's very direct. He's very to the point. And he's very clear. I don't know if you've read any of the things that he has written. And so we both came to admire another writer, William Zinsser, who is very famous, and he is 95 years old. And he too exercises as much as Jim does. And he too, thanks to exercise, has maintained a very sharp intellectual presence. And I think he is a role model for both of us. And it's interesting for me to see, and we joke about it, because it's interesting for someone who is 80 years old to have a model who is 95, right? And that there he is, and it's a nice reference to have and connect over and make jokes about it. So that's writing, I would say. So on one hand is the process of actually taking the students through all these deadlines, and the other is writing and how to approach writing, and also writing as a personal personal what?
Expression.
Yeah, expression, or more than that, reflection. Yeah.
Where do you see things in the next? Jim obviously intends not to retire. I know you're not doing the same class together anymore, but where do you see possible interaction in a work situation or otherwise, besides the presence of Jim around the department, going in the future? Any chance you might plan another course together? Or?
Oh, I would love to. In fact, I've really believe that second part of our working together on the same course should return, and I hope that he will want to do it. We do have our regular meetings every week because I do need him in my life, and I like learning from him, and it all happens very informally. So it's not I don't feel like I'm in that someone is coaching me, but it's just exchanging informal information about life. And then he has his teaching. He has this very specific urban design seminar that is very, very interesting for students because it focuses on the area around Washington Square and NYU, and that keeps them very, very interested in writing their own experiences about their life at NYU. So yes, I cannot see him retiring, actually.
Do you look at the urban environment differently in light of your time spent with Jim? Are your eyes seeing the city or its surroundings in a different way?
That, I don't know. I mean, we've had several conversations. He did help me when I was writing my dissertation because, of course, it so happens that Jim grew up with all these architects who have become dissertation subjects at one point or another, right? They're of the same generation. He went to school and he was taught by all the great names of architecture and urban design. He was classmates and colleagues with other very important architects. So when I was discussing my dissertation with him on an American architect, of course he happened to know him. And yes, of course he happened to know his partner. And of course it was very easy for him to introduce me to his partner, and I ended up working in this person's office on Union Square and having access to an amazing archive that I wouldn't have accessed otherwise. And when I decided I wanted to write something on the Bell Laboratories in New Jersey, of course he happened to know the person who worked in the Bell Laboratories in New Jersey. So not so much my influence on the urban environment, but very much in connecting me with New York City. Because Jim is really, even though he's not from New York, he's a real New Yorker. And he has done a lot for New York, and we know that with his participation in the Landmarks Committee and community boards. But I'm a New Yorker by really knowing people and knowing how to connect people, and that is what makes the city, after all, right? So he's very much that. He's a connector, and part of that scene, and he knows everybody. So that is very nice.
Anything else on the top of your mind, or? Forget something?
Do I forget something?
Like, oh yeah, that about Jim.
He has a great sense of humor. I don't know if you've noticed.
I find it it's subtle.
It's subtle, but it's very I find it very. You have to be on the same wavelength with him, but I find his humor very good, actually, very interesting. There is a lot of joking with Jim, and you wouldn't think that he jokes so much because he's always very stern-looking and serious-looking, but there is a lot of joking, so which is a wonderful thing.
Wonderful. Thank you so very much for taking
Thank
the
you
time today and sharing your thoughts on Jim's 80th birthday.
Absolutely.